everyone. Warm welcome back to the Doctor Will See You Now. I hope you've been having good reads. I hope you have not been short of a book that you felt you could dive into and just immerse yourself. I hope that TBR pile is coming down nicely. But as we always say, there's never enough time because there's always the next book that should be read. And today's author, I think, will just be adding yet one more book to that pile. In fact, I might say to you, that pile will always be there. Why don't you just get into this book straight away? Anyway, it gives me great pleasure to mention to welcome Jody Cooksley. Jody, thank you so much for agreeing to have our session together today. Are you well? How's everything going?
Everything's going brilliantly. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to talk to people who love reading about books.
I've been fascinated about your publishing journey and the genre that you write. But I wonder if we could start by going back a little bit further, because reading about, your history with literature and your history with writing. I read that you studied Victorian poetry. So
Mm,
you did literature, English lit at Oxford Brook, and then did a master in Victorian poetry.
yeah.
And just if you could talk to us a little bit about, you know, your passion for literature and how undergrad and postgrad days haven't dampened that.
Well, I've always been a writer. So I've written for a job for most of my life. I'm a trained journalist. I worked as a journalist for a long time, and I think a lot of authors do start off that way because you get into that habit of really writing every day. And so I don't think anything would have necessarily put me off writing. It's I've always thought it's probably the only thing that I can do. I adored books and I loved studying at Oxford Brookes because the tutors there were incredibly not just knowledgeable but really really passionate about literature, and it sort of sparked that enthusiasm for just thinking about literature and thinking about books and looking at the historical context of everything. I particularly love Victorian literature. I've always loved Victorian novels.
Mhm.
But I got into Victorian poetry because I really, really love the dramatic monologues of Robert Browning. So very dark, very gothic, Porphyria's Lover and My Last Duchess and all of those kinds of poems. And I found another dramatic monologuist called Sebastian Evans, who's really not very well known at all. And in fact, he's so not well known that when I did my MA on him, I had to wear white gloves when to touch the books in the British Library
Beautiful.
and get permission to use them, which was lovely. So if you get a chance and you find any, he's a brilliant dramatic monologuist. He's not quite so dark as Browning, but does get quite dark, and his poems mostly sort of fixate on that disordered dream of medieval life that the Victorians loved.
Mm, mm. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I love that notion that, that when we're able to get really up close and personal with those texts, so there's to me there's a feeling of like reverence, and it's almost like a religious experience to be allowed to, that it's not just a later imprint of something, but that it's actually, yeah, those original texts. It's beautiful. I guess for journalism, as you say, writing, it's writing's always been, important to you. But I do wonder, because whilst it's all, you know, all the work of words, being a wordsmith, I would imagine that writing prose, as opposed to, or writing novels as opposed to writing journalistic text, it is slightly different. And I wondered, what does writing novels give you that journalism maybe left you feeling, or leaves you, I wish.
Yeah, I think it's I think a lot of novelists want to capture. So when I first start thinking about a book, I think about the way that I want to make someone feel.
Mhm.
Um, and these kind of, and so I'm kind of on my seventh book now. And they always start with a this kind of deep feeling that I want to have. And this particular book started with the same deep feeling I had when I read one of Sheridan Le Fanu's really dark gothic novels. I wanted this book to follow people around a long time after they closed the pages. Uh, and
Excellent.
so
Yes.
you get this kind of plot down, and you get the skeleton of it down, and then you go through the process of really building the flesh on the bones. And it's that thing that no other writing can do for you, when you're padding it out and you can keep going through this novel, and every time you write it, the words capture more and more and more of what you intended people to feel. So it's making them very, it's almost like embroidering on a garment.
Mm, mm.
That's the feeling that you want to capture.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. I wonder as well, because journalism, I think, not involved in that world, that the deadlines are tighter. So does that mean that as an author, you're good with your deadlines?
Yeah, I'm really, really disciplined
Mhm.
with writing. And so,
Yeah.
and actually I think you really have to be, because you could just keep on editing and writing forever. It's like
Mhm.
starting to spell banana and not really knowing when to stop. Um, y- but I am very, very disciplined, and I
Mm,
do work full time as well in another
okay.
job in
Yeah.
communications. So I have to be very disciplined with my writing time. I'm quite an insomniac. I write in the middle of the night. But I do, when I'm in the first draft phase of writing a novel, I do write every single day, at least 30 minutes, regardless of whatever else I've got on the schedule.
Yeah.
And I think that discipline of, okay, we have to be at the desk now, we have this deadline now. I'll set my own deadlines and I will stick to them.
You have my admiration. I think as a typical academic, it sometimes deadlines get a bit stretched, and I know that's wrong, and I should change. However, there was a question I was going to change for a bit later because we will get into this beautifully dark, delicious novel. But you said that you're an insomniac,
Mm,
and I've been listening recently because I too am a night owl.
right.
And I think often we get really bad press, compared to our lark friends or colleagues. How do you deal with, do you get given the label night owl, and do
Mm.
you own it readily? Are you proud of that, as opposed to should we be hiding in the shadows in shame?
Well, there's always fun to be had in the shadows. So I wouldn't say don't hide in the shadows, but I've absolutely owned it. The only thing I really dislike is when, if I when I tell people I only really sleep for 3 or 4 hours a night, they immediately always compare me to Margaret Thatcher, which is
Mhm.
not something I like.
Yeah.
But I do, yeah, I am proud of it. I've never missed out on anything. I've always been pretty good at staying up for the parties, and
Yeah.
as well. And I just, yeah, there's not a lot of point in me going to bed earlier, because I'll just wake up at 2 in the morning and then
Yeah.
wander about the house. So I think it's made me really productive. I don't think I'd have been able to create novels and work if I wasn't a night owl.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. That gives me a little bit of, yeah. Feels better. It's good. Anyway, back to the writing, and I noticed that your two previous published novels, and now The Small Museum, they are of different genre.
Mm.
Are you keen not to be pigeonholed? Are you keen to let the writing spirit flow and the stories come as they do, rather than needing to put yourself in a certain category, shall we say?
I think it's what's really interesting is, obviously, the first book was it almost kind of chose itself, because there was this incredible 19th century pioneer photographer called Julia Margaret Cameron. And once I found out a bit more about her, I could not believe that nobody else had written a book about her. And I immediately set about, and I was already writing creatively, but short pieces of creative writing, short stories and flash fiction
Mm,
and so on. and I wrote that book very quickly, and really enjoyed it, and really enjoyed writing in the historical kind of Victorian period. The second book was really a product of bereavement for me. I lost a lot of people very quickly, very close together. And that book is creating a it's a very much an outpouring of grief, and what that means, how to
Mm.
sort of rebuild yourself through a historical novel, through two different narrative viewpoints. So I never really set out to write either of those in particular genres. This book feels like my happy place. So Victorian Gothic is always what I've loved to read. As soon as I wrote this book, I loved it so much that I wrote a sequel. I'm almost finished on a third Victorian Gothic, and I have two more in my head that I'm composting at the moment. So I think I've found my happy place with
Lovely,
novels.
lovely. This is really interesting, but to see your eyes light up when you talk about, you know, this novel and then the novels that are there, the sequel and what's coming, and you say it's your happy place, and it really
Mm,
shows on your face, and I'm thrilled for that because I think, talking about, you know, other processes that writing has enabled you to do, but you've come to this point. And we should say, of course, that the Small Museum was the winner of the Caledonian Novel Award. I mean, congratulations for that. That recognition of your work. So yeah, lovely. Mm, the Gothic. It's clear from all that we've talked about so far, this is it's a genre that you relish. And again, coming back to that thing, could you talk about any favorite elements
mm.
and elements that you've managed to weave within this story? Or other elements that you come back to again and again because you just, you really enjoy putting them on the page?
So I love books that feel like someone's padding along behind you, in the dark.
Mhm.
And actually that's why I love the kind of Gothic genre, because it's not overt like horror. You
Mhm.
don't really see anything. What it does is give every reader its own room 101, because a lot of the things are implied and there's this ongoing sense of threat. Um, so by the time you get to the kind of denouement, a lot of the readers have already done the worst bits of imagining in their own minds. So it's everything in the book is what the reader is frightened of themselves. Um, I had I had a review a couple of weeks ago which said Jody Cooksley is the queen of sustained threat, which which I'm going to get put on a t-shirt because I love that phrase.
Yeah.
But I think it's that thing that makes you feel as though whilst you're reading, you have to draw the curtains and lock the doors.
Mm, most definitely, most definitely. And thank you. I mean, I love, what that reader has coined. I think it's perfect for your writing style and the journey that you take us on with your character. And feeling for that character as well. I think there's other bits that I'd like to come back to, but if you can tell us, I've read that you've talked about it as like a coming of age story.
Mm.
Tell us about your main protagonist and the creation of her, and is she still there with you? Because it's that sense I always feel. You mentioned it, but do authors let characters go, or do characters not let themselves go because they're still with? Tell us about that character.
So Madeleine Brewster is she's very young, when she gets married off to Dr. Lucius Everly. And it's part of an arranged marriage to restore her family's sullied reputation, if you like. And such marriages were pretty common, in 1873 when the book is set. She began life as being quite a convenient type of character for that particular plot. Very classic Victorian Gothic innocent person being swept along in this sort of tide of darkness. Actually, she surprised me immensely while I was writing, because the response that she had to some of the things that she was being put through were not actually exactly as I was expecting.
Mhm.
So
Mm.
she surprised me very much by becoming much more strong and much more sort of feisty. She definitely fought back. She found ways to almost save herself, if you like, and she found those deep relationships with other women. In many ways, it's a book about discovering something within you that allows you to have those really meaningful female
Mm.
friendships. And so once the book was finished, I was finished with her because I thought she's all right now. She's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah, yeah, after
She's
everything.
yeah.
Yeah.
So in that sense, definitely a coming of age story because it really felt like she'd got to the point where it's like having a child. She got to the point where I thought she'd be okay. The other characters who weren't okay at the end of the novel and who wouldn't leave me, they're the ones that ended up being the main characters in the sequel.
Beautiful. I love that. Yeah, yeah. That and that sense of, okay, I can tie this now, and yeah, I can let you go, but I have other work to do here. Yeah. Other and those characters that you've taken on, were they with you before Maddie became formed, or were they, as you were writing, did they come into being?
They did come into being as I was writing. It wasn't until absolutely at the end of the book that I realised who needed to be the
Uh-huh.
main subject of the sequel, and it's because she had a story to tell.
Mm, mm. We should venture closer to the darkness, I think. And if we could talk a little bit about, the eponymous small museum.
Hmm.
What is this museum? It is linked, and again, without giving too much away, it's linked to her husband,
Hmm.
that you've mentioned. What is the concept of the small museum?
So most Victorians they were all really quite obsessed with evolution, with the natural world, but mostly with collecting and sorting and owning and displaying the natural world. I don't know if you've ever been to any of the museums like the Ashmolean in Oxford or the Booth Museum in Brighton, which are all from private collectors. So they're extreme examples of these museums. But almost every middle class or upper class Victorian would have had one of these cabinets of curiosity in their home. When I went to and I was interested in that, and I was interested in writing a novel about the Victorians that were trying to find the missing link and the lengths that they would go to, because that's some of the things that they did were pretty dark anyway, even in real life. And I wanted to really explore the lengths that people would go to, those sort of depths of human depravity in order to win, in order to
Mm,
be the best at these things, a bit like the picture of Dorian Gray, that kind of exploration of characters. So in this particular small museum, Lucius, Dr. Lucius Everly has taken it over from his father, and his father was a particularly grim character
mm,
as well. It's all kept under lock and key. Maddie knows that she wants to see inside it. She's imagining the kinds of things that are in there, but actually, when she does get a first glimpse in there, she is fascinated by what she finds. They are some of the more kind of natural curiosities, but she's a very talented artist,
mm,
and she begins to see that she might win his respect by being able to help him to find his missing link, his sort of his fossil evidence that will help his theories and help him to win with the societies and restore his father's name.
mm. An interesting partnership. You mentioned, the whole aspect of evolutionary science, and I wondered then about your own research in delving into this aspect.
Mhm.
Um, how much you decided to bring into the novel, what you decided to leave behind, and if there is anything that you found whilst you were researching. I mean, you've talked about that human depravity, but I
Mm.
wondered if one element, let's say, that didn't find its way into the book, but that totally fascinated you while you were doing the research around it.
So I had to reread because obviously it's really I didn't put huge amounts of it's you know it's fiction at the end of the day.
Mm.
But I did have to reread all of those seminal texts, Linnaeus and Darwin, and we had to know what people knew then,
Yeah.
in order for some of those kind of light conversations to make sense. So I did reread all of those. Um, I think I also visited quite a lot of museums. I visited the Hunterian Museum, and that's the reason that I decided to give these chapter titles as exhibits, because the Hunterian Museum has some incredibly grim things, and I think a lot of those were probably things that I left out because
Mhm.
although there is some quite dark stuff in there, and actually the things that I imagined were pretty dark, there were real human remains that had been decorated in this museum and put on display. There were mummified things. There were horrible medical curiosities. There were also abnormalities, sort of animal abnormalities and things. And all of these things were in jars of formaldehyde
Mm.
and just up there used for display. And it sort of looking at all of these things together in jars really, if I'd actually put all of those into the book, I think people would definitely have thought that I'd made them up.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, you made me catch my breath there in thinking about, wow, what was the spirit of the age that, obviously something really important pushing people to make discoveries
Mm,
and how and those moral judgments that from, a 21st century lens is really like, whoa, what was happening? And back then, maybe things that were quite acceptable in the name of science.
well, I'm not sure that we're hugely different. I read a story at the weekend, that showed that human brain cells grown in a laboratory had been able to be taught to play simple computer games. So I think I think we are still doing some of that
Mm.
stuff. I think we're doing it under different guises, and in that there are scientists now that are trying to put uh, plant cell types in with animal cell types to make plants that can walk around. I mean, some of this stuff is still going on.
Yeah, and is it that within our contemporary clinical setting, where things maybe aren't as leaky,
Yeah,
we can accept that better than looking back and thinking, "Oh my God, what were they doing?"
yeah.
Interesting.
Well, I think what we don't do now is we don't have the concept of freaks of nature because of
Mm.
course they did, and they put people on show, and they had these kind of traveling sideshows. And again, with the medical curiosity, that was, people used to pay to go and see all these things that they had found, and to view them, and to in the same way that they used to pay to go and look around asylums,
Yes.
and just be
Yeah.
horrified by what they found there. So they were just very much more open about these things, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. That we may have closed things down. Although now,
Mm.
as you're speaking, it's making me think about social media, and
Mm,
what makes its way, for us to see. Anyway, back
yeah.
to the novel. Back to the novel, because you mentioned um, female friendships and what they can do. And I wondered if you'd talk to us a little bit about Maddie's friend Caroline Fairley.
Mm.
Yeah. Who is she? What is their bond? And again, when did she appear to you as the author, the creator? Um, before, during. Tell us about her.
So Caroline is really a product. So I love Gothic. I really do love the Gothic, and I love all of those old Victorian Gothics, which give you this, kind of creeping sense. You know that something's going to happen. There's a locked room, and there's crumbling castles, and all of those bits. But I do think they can be very formulaic. So one of the things that I wanted to do with this particular novel was make it crime. So to make it a Gothic, but also to add those elements of crime which make it much more modern for the reader, and the plot then becomes much more active.
Mhm.
So I disrupted the Gothic by
Beautiful.
introducing these different chapters where we know that a murder has been committed. We've got our protagonist up in the dock, but we don't know why she's there, whether it's true. It begins to make us doubt her, maybe, as
Mhm,
a reliable
mhm.
narrator.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, I needed another narrator. And it was really important to me that Maddie had at least somebody in the book that had her back.
Mm.
And so this character was created, of Caroline Fairley, and she then narrates these sort of intermediate chapters. She becomes the person that helps to track down some of the elements that help to resolve what happens in the book in the end.
And so, as you say, you have these 2 timelines, the almost like the before and the after.
Mm,
And when you, because 'cause I'm always interested in the way that authors construct their work, not so much did you plan it or did you not? But that idea of the the slipping in and out, and whether you wrote one timeline or wrote the other and then brought it together, or as you wrote, were you in and out?
I think a little bit of both, actually. So initially, uh, I was writing them at the time, and then I sort of realized actually I needed to create one timeline and then sort of look back, because one of the things, and I know from my own reading, I'm an absolutely avid reader. I read all the time. And from my own reading, I know that what we all like to do, especially as crime and gothic readers, is to solve mysteries. So you like to have these little breadcrumbs in there. And in order to do that, you do need to do a bit of chop and changing and kind of back writing, and filling them in sort of in arrears.
Yeah, yeah. I love the way that it works, and again that idea of hearing somebody speak for someone. Yeah, yeah. Balancing good and evil,
Mm,
and again, I liked what you said about just taking the gothic and destabilizing it, doing other things with it. As an author, and as you've been going on with your writing, how much do you enjoy to play in the darkness? I mean, I loved what you said about great things can happen in the shadows,
mm,
but you know, do, uh, do we as readers dictate a little bit? Because I think most readers do like order to be restored, do like there to be a sense of justice.
mm,
So I wondered about, as an author, you where do you see that balance of good and evil playing out as you write?
mm. That's a really interesting question. Um, I think always I knew that this was going to be resolved. So and I didn't quite know how,
Yeah.
when I first started writing, but I did always know that, nothing can be quite so dark that people are not saved, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah.
It,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's not really, nobody really wants, you don't want to read that. You kind of like it, we all understand that life is made of dark and the light, and that most things are grey,
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
rather than being black or white.
Mm,
So we all know that, we all understand that. But when we are reading, we want to be entertained, and we have always used storytelling, as a way of sort of guiding people through. It needs to be positive, and it needs to be sort of aspirational as well as entertaining, if that makes sense.
mm,
So there was never an issue that these things were not going to be resolved. And I think the darker you get, the more that's a necessary thing.
mm. Yeah, but yeah, I think coming back to what you're saying about the notion of entertainment as well, and how does that entertainment manifest itself? I think unless, and I know there's a spectrum of humanity, and maybe if you tend to one end and you enjoy seeing the suffering, but I
Mm,
think most of us like to see there either being a redemption, or there is a way out from this darkness, and it comes. So yeah.
You want the delicious thrill. You don't necessarily want the bad stuff. It's a bit like going on a fairground ride and loving being scared half to death, but knowing that you're going to get off that
But yeah,
ride.
yes, it will come to an end and you will
Yeah.
get off, and you will have. I've been through that, and I've come out of it, and it's okay. Yeah,
Mm,
still back in a little bit though, Victorian Gothic, and I think no Victorian literature is complete without its sense of philanthropy. I mean, that age of philanthropy, and it's always a difficult question, is it not? Because what moves people to do good, what
mm,
moves people to seek to support other people? Um, is there such a thing as altruism? And big moral questions. We don't usually go this deep, but I think that the way the things that you're writing about made me think of that. And so Lucius's sister Grace and her philanthropic work. Can you
mm.
talk to us a little bit about that without going too far?
So Grace was a fun character to write.
Mm-hmm.
She, I never really intended for her to be quite so awful, but she's another character that really got, she ran away with me a little bit. She was delicious to write. I think it was very easy for Victorians to hide bad things behind a mask of respectability
Mm,
because there was this expectation that particularly middle class and upper class women would take on doing good, from the goodness of their hearts, despite the fact that the way they lived and the way that they did things and the rents that they increased for people were the very things that usually put the people they were helping into the bad situations in the first place. So it was a very odd society in that respect. And I do think, and Dickens did this really, really well. So he has some, is it Mrs. Gamp? I can't remember which book she's from, but she's another excellent example of this. She's a very philanthropic person, but actually she just kind of blunders in and does more harm than good. And I suspect, although they were really amazing things and beautiful libraries built, and so
mm,
on. Often they were built on money that was the product of really, really socially dark and immoral things. And so I just wanted to explore that a little bit in a microcosm with her.
mm, mm. And then Maddie's experience again of being that young woman and doing her duty in a way of going as was custom. You leave your home, you become part of your husband's family, and that, yeah. Were you always keen for her to have I want to say to have a backbone, but I don't know if that's the right way to put this, or that she would find that backbone of, you know, surviving and becoming and the reason why I ask is because I've read of the work that you do of coaching and mentoring young women.
Mm.
And I wondered when you were writing her, did you have that aspect of your life there of seeing someone, grow into something?
I think it's a really important thing for women, and the reason that I like to do kind of work mentoring people in various different professions, PR, marketing, whatever things that I've done, is that I wish there had been, and I've had some amazing strong women in my professional life. Um, and I think when you're very young, you're flooded with all these kind of nice hormones and the desire to please, and that a lot of that just drops off as you get older, and you realize actually, just you, you need somebody older to just tell you that it's okay to push forward and it's okay to do some of these things that you see the men around you doing.
Yeah, I have to say it's been an absolute delight to reach that wonderful age of 60, and that sense of things just don't matter anymore, and yeah, to pass that on to at least to say to younger generations, be aware of this,
Mm.
and there has to be some benefits of getting older. I think that's one of them. Um, Telling women's stories. and the importance of literacy and literature. So, with this novel, with The Small Museum, I wondered if there is anything that I know authors always say, I write my story and then I give it, then it's yours and you read as you wish but is there anything that as you were writing and giving us the story that you would like us, and I don't normally like to gender things, but I just wonder, was there something that you wanted your women readers to take away from what you were giving to us?
I think that a lot of books which are kind of categorized as women's fiction
Mm,
or women's literary fiction really have a strong story of female friendship to tell. A lot of them do, and they're about self-discovery. And a lot of them are about self-discovery through hardship, but also through kind of helping others. And so I think it would be great if people who are reading that book didn't just see the darkness in it, but saw how that darkness can then be a product for something positive. Um, and it does, as at the end of the day, it is a story of very strong female friendships.
might I ask you, I don't have a physical copy. Do you have a physical copy of the
Oh,
book there? Would you do us the honour of holding up that most
gonna come
lovely?
across it's backwards, isn't it, in my camera?
No, it is for you, but it isn't for us.
Oh,
That's
okay,
great. It's showing
brilliant.
beautifully.
There we are.
I mean, it's glorious. I wonder, to what extent did you have any input into that? Did you choose anything, or did they offer you this?
They no, do you know, they've been amazing. So the publishers, Alison Busby, have been absolutely
Yes, yeah,
amazing throughout, and that was the first cover design they came up with, and I was fully expecting because this book um is been a real, it was the book that I always wanted to write. It's a real kind of labor of love for me. And so I was fully expecting to sort of roll my sleeves up and have some battles over what I wanted the cover to look like. And I was just adored it
glorious,
straight away. It absolutely
beautiful.
captured what I wanted the book to be.
Mhm. That is so lovely. I mean, your publishers, they do wonderful work, without a doubt, and I'm so glad that that they are looking after you, and that they did this, because I think, where is a book in an author's life? What does it mean? Yeah, I've said this before. I think often it's a bit like children. Each child is important and loved for what they are, but this has clearly been, as you say, a labor of love, and
Mm.
for that cover, for you just to be able to say yes, yeah, this does it. So I love that. Now, two things. I'm aware of time, and there's a couple of things that I wanted to keep asking about. Strong female friendships. I am not expecting you to name anybody because, again, to not either embarrass anybody or to put you on the spot. But in your life, strong female friendships, what have they given you? Like I say, you don't have to mention anybody specifically, but if you can think
Mm.
of maybe moments in life where there's been somebody or some people there, and what have they given you, either that you needed or that you didn't expect and they brought to you?
Oh, that's a good question. There's too many instances to count, really.
Mm.
I think it's those points where you just think, well, like, you think you're not going to be able to carry on doing something,
Mhm,
and it can just take one person to see you,
mhm,
like to really see you.
mhm,
I'm very, very blessed to have some really, really lovely long-term female friendships, and they they make you feel mighty sometimes, if that makes
mhm.
sense.
It does. Yeah.
Those people who just make you feel much. So I've got actually here in my writing room loads and loads of cards from me going that kept me stronger, and one of them just says that, be mighty. And
Beautiful.
actually, you need to look at that. And every time I see this, it reminds me of the phrase. A friend I had at university who's still a very good friend of mine. Um, and it's that kind of thing, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love the way you talk about, you say, I'm blessed, with those long-term friendships, and yeah, that when things are tricky, they can remind you you've got this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
you can do this. Now, I did read because I like to see what readers think about an author's book. When I'm looking at, and somebody said they felt that not every question that was posed maybe in the book was answered.
Oh, yes, yes, I've seen
Yeah.
actually, there's been I've had about 70 reviews so far, and there were 2 reviews which said that they felt that there was more that they wanted to know about things, and I'm curious with that because actually
Mm.
I thought a lot of the ends had been tied up.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
And is it that isn't this lovely, curious readers
mm,
who, they've taken, the story as you've created it, and you have made them think, what if?
yeah,
And I think that's always, wow, did my writing stimulate you that much that you actually went further than I intended? But for me, the question was, the book has clearly left you wanting to write more.
mm,
Did you think it would? Did you
no,
think it would lead you to go on and do a sequel?
no, I didn't really, and it was interesting because at the point, there are 2, and I won't give anything about the sequel away,
Mm,
but
mm,
there are 2 of the characters, well, in fact, 3 of the characters in this book, that are all quite minor characters. Um, there's stories they weren't complete for me after I had finished. I mean, they were complete enough to finish the
mhm,
book, but I wanted to know a bit more about them. But it wasn't until I won the Caledonia Novel Award that I thought, oh, it's good enough for me to do that.
mhm,
So I
mhm.
needed that sort of impetus to be able to think, no, I will
Yeah.
write a sequel, and that will be fine.
Yeah, yeah, I'm so glad. Thank you to the Caledonian Award because we might not have had this sequel. Yeah, I'd like to think we would, but maybe it gave you permission to do to keep going.
Mm.
My last question then, and I'm sorry because it's been an absolute delight to meet you and talk with you, and the wonders of being able to do things online. Whereas to get to be, face to face in the same physical space might be tricky. It is an absolutely, I mean, it's such a, you say delicious, and I love that word. It is a deliciously dark novel, and it has those moments of light, which are great. I wonder for you if you can take us maybe backstage and maybe talk to us about a moment where, and then maybe there wasn't, I don't know, but when the book, there had to be some serious wrangling,
Mm.
when it might have been like, I'm thinking back again to children that they can test our patience and they can, was there ever a point with this book where you thought you're gonna be the end of me? I need to just put you aside for a moment. Or were there any aspects that you wrangled and that they are a real triumph that you think, you tested me and we made it?
Mm. Honestly, I think all books do that.
Hmm.
If you ask any author, there is always a point at which you have to just shut the thing in a drawer because there will be some element of plot or something that you think, well, I've written that and it's come out as much too convenient, and
Hmm.
that's not how a story should really roll. It needs to be a bit more subtle than that. So sooner or later, you have to shut a book in a drawer and you have to let it think about what it's done
Yeah.
for for a
Yeah.
few for a few weeks, and then you get it back out again, and usually at that point it kind of
Mm.
resolved itself. And I fix a lot of elements of plot while I'm running. I'm quite a big runner,
Okay. Yeah.
and
Huh?
I'm often sort of stopping and taking notes on things because
So do you carry a little pad and pen with you,
just
or
my
do you
phone.
speak?
Yeah,
Or
I do it on
yeah,
my
you
phone.
speak
Yeah.
on your phone. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Jody. The time has flown, and
Yeah, it really has.
I just thank you so much for the way that you've spoken so freely about things. Um, Really wish you all the very best. Are you happy with the way that the book is being received? Is it?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, it's going to be people who enjoy a gothic novel.
Mhm.
I'm really hoping will really enjoy this.
Yeah, I'm sure there will, and I think again, there is a wonderful strand in, if we can call that umbrella thing of crime fiction, where there's darkness and there's a murder or that it's something to be solved. But I think, that there's a band of us who do enjoy a story that is set in the time in which you've set it, with the kind of characters. I think we like to feel there's something lurking. Um, yeah, and it certainly does. So, thank you, thank you for today. Thank you for your writing, and you know, not ever wanting to rush things, but really looking forward to that sequel as well. So,
Oh, amazing. Brilliant.
yeah,
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
absolute pleasure. Thank you.